It's really a very good and happy feeling to be here together with Jesper again. We first met each other 22 years ago. That was in Germany, close to Freiburg, for a little conference on biosemiotics, where some people who became active later throughout all these 20 years first met in the field. So Jesper studied biology in Copenhagen, right? Yeah.
Biochemistry. Biochemistry.
And his field was closer to smaller living beings. When preparing his dissertation, he also worked in the lab, where he became a specialist on very little organisms. Was that so?
No, I'm a biochemist.
Biochemist, but your work was on
bacteria.
On bacteria, right? But later it turned out that he is very talented in writing. And he became writing on various issues, in different ways related to biology, but also a little wider, because you established together with some friends a radical scientific philosophical journal, Naturkampfen.
Oh yeah.
Right. And up to now, Jesper has published, I think, something like 10 books in Danish. Only few of them have been translated. In 1996, there appeared a book what was initially thought to have title Semiosphere. But since the American publishers, by some reason, didn't accept that title, later the book is titled Science of Meaning in the Universe, which actually became one of the very first monographs on biosemiotics in the world. And on biosemiotics, Jesper would tell more, but as I'm also learned quite a bit from him, so I find this is a field which is really fascinating, because it opens your eyes to look at living beings and to look at the world in a very fresh and, I would say, intimate way. It also is important in that part what will be the main topic of this talk. This is bridging the understanding in different fields. The book, which is now published in Estonian, was his major monograph on biosemiotics, and this one we will introduce this a little later after the lecture. Most comprehensive book what there exists nowadays about semiotic view on living beings. Here in Estonia, I think we have even a special place and atmosphere for this, because one of real pioneers of the field, Jakob von Uexküll, comes from Estonia. And so we here have this line of thinking between biology via Uexküll up to semiotics with Lotman, having pretty important part for our intellectual culture. And so, thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Kalevi, for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this nice little city. Unfortunately, I can't stay here, but I know the city from other times. Rather than giving you the whole story of how this started, I'll go directly into the things. And this, of course, is my institute in Copenhagen. Here is what I'm trying to talk about today. First, something about cognition and bodily feeling. And then the other things will come to them. And if I manage, I would even perhaps say a few words, a few slides on the last of these topics. Cognition and causality, I start there. Causality is a strange thing. People have discussed what it is for centuries, but I think we should observe that when the toddler crawls around on the floor, and she suddenly raises her head up and bangs the head into the tabletop, then she knows something very important about causality, because she knows that something she herself did caused it to pain, to hurt. And this is how, in a way, this is the root of causality. It's a bodily feeling. It's not a transcendental thing, as Immanuel Kant thought. It's not a psychological phenomenon, as David Hume thought. It's actually a biosemiotic thing. And force, the concept of force is ultimately also a biological concept rooted in bodily feelings and movements. The effects that flow from the use of force are experienced as caused by the force we have to spend in order to surmount the resistance that nature or other people raises against our actions. And then comes the strange thing. When this concept is projected out into the world, it seems to work. And I think this project, the fact that we can project our own bodily experience, causality, into the world at large and derive trustworthy and non-falsified understanding from it, allows us to make an abduction, to reach the strong hypothesis that the world is in a deep sense of the same kind as is life. And this immediately poses a strange question, because in natural science, final causation is tabooed. You must never explain things by final causation. I use the term final causation, a causation where something happens for the sake of something other. And this phenomenon is such a pronounced phenomenon in human life. So if we are like nature at large, how come that we don't have this phenomenon in nature? And you probably know this. It was Francis Bacon back in 1620 that pronounced this: human understanding is like an uneven mirror receiving rays from things and meanings, and merging its own nature with the nature of things, which thus distorts and corrupts it. And that, of course, is the reason why final causation and anthropomorphism is tabooed in science. And still, Darwin came a few hundred years later and told us that we are products of nature. So this nature that is deprived of any final causality created us, and our whole life would not be understandable if we did not do things for purposes. So what is this? I know that there are people who would dismiss the whole problem and say it's an illusion, all of it, but I don't belong to those people. And here I would say that Peirce had a take on final causation, which I think is helpful. He says it's a widespread error to think that a final cause is necessarily a purpose. A purpose is merely that form of final cause which is most familiar to our experience. Purpose is the conscious modification of final causation. And in the Cartesian scheme, of course, we can only think in this: either we have purposes, human purposes, or otherwise we have this lawful nature without any purposes or any finality to it. I think we can be a little more daring and say that second law of thermodynamics is actually very close, comes very close to something like an ultimate final causation. Here is the way Terence Deacon explains it. It's the fact that the entropy can't decrease. It's bound to increase. So it tends to go in one direction. There's a finality to the thermodynamic laws. And then he says there's nothing that prevents this situation to end up in this situation. It's just so extremely unlikely that it will ever happen. So that's what the law says. It's extremely unlikely that the entropy will decrease, but it may happen in principle, and that's a very important fact. And I think in the work I'm not going to talk about that work. His book, Incomplete Nature, he confronts this problem head on and gives us a possible way to understand that teleodynamic systems, that is, systems establishing a consequence organized, how they could evolve. And in the end, it all comes from the second law of thermodynamics. So to me, physics should, or the basic physics is about thermodynamics, it's not about quantum mechanics. So I would personally prefer, because the term final causation is bound up into Aristotelian and all other kinds of thoughts which we have no reason to mingle into this semiotic. So I prefer just to talk about semiotic causation as this bringing about effects through interpretation. Sign processes are inherently intentional. All living systems possess a kind of agency, a kind of intentionality. I know that biologists would say that this is just genetic predetermination. I don't believe it. I heavily believe that this little duckling wants to get up to her mother. Agency has a natural history, and that's why we study biosemiotics. It has a natural history of its own, stretching from the first hesitant beginnings in bacteria to human consciousness. So it's a kind of evolution which has never been told or studied. So much about this cognition, bodily feeling. We'll probably slightly return to it. Now I would go into how we came into this, in my opinion, strange way of thinking, which is the way of modern science. And of course, the French philosopher Descartes had the misfortune to live at a time when he had to reinvent a lot of things. The whole modern science began to be formed in the 17th century, and he was a brilliant biologist. And you can go into his stuff, and he has all kinds of descriptions of how our senses are led up to the brain and how they work mechanically. And that's what I call sensory mechanics. And the whole of biology to this day, I think, is based on sensory mechanics, this idea that somehow it all goes through mechanical or biochemical ways from what is received in the sense apparatus up to the brain. But how, and that's the question, of course, which was always posed, how can sensory impressions become thoughts and ideas? And this I used to illustrate it by this homunculus trap. The homunculus is a little man. And there's a long history very funny history about homunculi, but I won't tell it here because I have so much other to tell you. But this man is looking at a fried egg, okay? So I remember my physics teacher in school, she said that when it came to optics, that the small babies, when they are born, they see the world upside down. Because when you learn about refraction patterns, you can see that the rays would cross and they would get the... But she calmed down and said that, of course, in a few weeks' time, the baby would learn to turn the world around. Now, if this idea is true, then we might imagine that the fried eggs reach the eyes of the man, and then it is projected up to a screen inside the brain, because otherwise it gives no sense. It's because we have this metaphor of a screen that somehow the rays are projected up to a screen, but how can the man know what is on this screen? Well, he can only know it if somebody tells him. So we have a homunculus sitting here telling the man that now you're seeing a fried egg, so he knows what he is seeing. But of course, the problem then is, how can he know what he sees? How can the homunculus know it? Well, he must have a screen up in his brain, and then there must be a still smaller homunculus in his brain sitting and telling him that he should tell me, or the man, that he's seeing, and so on. As you can see, homunculus, that's what we call a homunculus trap. It's an explanation that really doesn't explain anything. It's very, very used. Biologists love this kind of explanations. They, for some reason, believe in it. Descartes was not so stupid. He knew that the phenomenon of human thinking implies that in addition to sensible things, what he called res extensa, as extended things, there must also exist stuff without extension, for human thoughts have no physical extension. And so he introduced this other principle that would be present in humans but not in animals, a principle which he called res cogitans, thought substance, if you like. And the problem, of course, was that those two things, how could they work together, so to say? And nobody has ever been able to answer that question. So what happened was, in reality, this dualism, this res extensa, res cogitans dualism, was split into two halves, two monisms, so that we had somebody studying res extensa, natural science and medicine, and that's what leads to, that's the materialist point of view, and we have the humanities, phenomenology, studying res cogitans, which we call idealism. So those two philosophical branches, idealism, materialism, is in a way only half worlds, if you like. They have to cooperate, or I would say so. This is intolerable. And all over the world, universities today have faculties for res cogitans and other faculties for res extensa, and people don't understand each other. And Immanuel Kant, of course, was him who saw this. If our thoughts and ideas are produced entirely inside ourselves by the tools of res cogitans, how then can we be sure that our ideas and concepts reflect an external reality? And as you know, Kant concluded that we can never come to know das Ding an sich, but only always das Ding für mich. This cannot be. And I think if we are to sort of get out of it, we must go back, all the way back to this Cartesian sensory mechanics. That's where the things went wrong. And that's, I think, now we have Peirce scholars present, so I hope I'm not saying too much, but I think that's more or less what Charles Sanders Peirce saw so many years ago. So what do I mean by sensory semiotics? Now, what Peirce changed, I will say, or as I read him, as I understand him, that instead of thinking that thoughts operate on concepts and ideas, what they do, of course, but more basically, they operate through science. And there's an enormous difference between concepts and science. Concepts refer, the little girl has a concept of an apple, but when she sees the apple, she immediately make a signification. It immediately signifies something to her, and that's even more primary. So sensory semiotics is this, to understand how, to study how we understand things through their signification. And I would just briefly say that the idea is that we can know about the world because it inevitably assumes signification. We do not mysteriously possess an internal conceptual model or representation of the world. Instead, we are embedded in the world as meaningful, and it's only through our analytical skills that we collectively in science can learn to designify it. And that's, of course, extremely important. That's what we do in universities. We learn to designify, but it's not the other way around. First, the word signifies, then we must designify. So, we're already in the middle. Now comes, of course, what this book mostly is about. So I'll explain what the meaning of biosemiotics is, what it's about. So it will take some slides. First, let's be clear about how we use language. In Greek language, sign has the name of semion, and from that we have the semiosis, which is the sign process. That is, I see a cloud and know that I even unconsciously take my umbrella because I know it will be raining. So that's a sign process. I even don't have to know, it doesn't need to be conscious. So semiotics is a science of semiosis, the science of that study sign processes. And semiosis should not be confused with communication. It's a very usual confusion. Communication is always semiosis, of course. It's always exchange of signs. But most sign processes are probably not communicative at all. And the reason I show this little girl that is blushing is that most of us hate to be read. When we blush, we are embarrassed and we would not like people to see it. So we are disclosed by our own blushing. So it's definitely not communication. It's just that the other people are capable of interpreting the signs, which we didn't want to emit in the first place. So I would say that 99 or more percent of all interpretation is not about communication. It's about signification, about reading what goes on, most of the time unconsciously. And design, well, it's something that refers to something else. Now, you must not believe that the dog sees the dog. This, of course, is faked. Yeah, signs show us something. It's burning, isn't it? And somebody has walked here. That's what signs do. They show us something. Now, they may be wrong because this is actually not a fire. It's actually a tornado. But, well, it's hard to interpret these kind of things. So, as soon as we leave the safe world of informatics, we come into this world where you cannot know. You may err. It may be wrong. And biosemiotics then is the theory of life's creative agency. The study of living systems from a semiotic or a sign theoretic perspective. Biosemiotics claims that life processes are organized in obedience to a semiotic dynamics. Molecular structures are not just molecules, they are also signs. Of course they are molecules, and we have nothing. We are fully in agreement with biochemistry and biology as it's usually practiced, but we claim that we cannot reach really understanding of what goes on without also understanding that those molecules have a semiotic aspect to them. And exemplifying here, the cell membrane, and there sits this receptor molecule that grasps a hormone. You can see how it's it's an icon, so to say, for the hormone. And here, of course, you should know that if the cell membrane is that thick, I think it would have to stretch all around Tallinn in order to get a picture of how big the cell would be. And that would, in a normal human cell, there would be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of these receptor molecules on each of our cells. And we have some 50,000 billion cells in our body. So you can see that's quite a lot. This, of course, is a semiotic. This, of course, is organized in obedience to how semiotic dynamics is. Oh, this is let's skip that. Even at the level of the DNA, we always get this picture of DNA as a sequence, a long sequence of letters, A, T, C, G. But it's also a spatial structure. The DNA, which is here made like a thread, has to be in a very definite spatial structure. So here, for instance, areas on the DNA called enhancers, ENH up there, sitting perhaps 1,000 bases away from the active place where the gene should be read. They must all be there. You can see a lot of different transcription factors are cooperating to create this particular spatial structure. And now this is only two-dimensional, but you should imagine this three-dimensionally, of course, so it's much more complicated. And only if this whole coordinated set of enzymes are assembled in this way will the gene be read. So there are all kinds of modification, editing possibilities, or how you can modify this depending on the situation of the cell, which means that the reading of genes is highly contextual. In some conditions it would be read once in one way, and in other conditions it would be read in another. So that's why we can't just talk of DNA as information or genes as information. They have to be interpreted, and it's the cell that interprets it. And even at this level of the helix, you can see lots of things going on at the spatial level. Now let's take another level here. Here we have a mating ritual among fruit flies. And it's strange, but the third step in this mating ritual is called singing. I haven't heard it. I suppose it takes special apparatus to hear it. But apparently there must be some sound emission of some kind, otherwise they wouldn't call it singing. Now, the funny thing about this, and the reason why I show you this, is that only at the moment where the male starts singing to the female fly, only in that moment her follicles will start maturing and the eggs will start to be mature. The maturation process will be initiated at this particular point. So, and of course, I don't know a thing about fruit flies. I suppose they don't have ears, but somehow it must go through the brain. I don't know. Must it be? And here at another level, this is a nerve cell growing from what is the bone marrow, isn't it? It has to find a muscle or something else where it can innervate, and this is in an embryonic state, and it's actually very long distances those nerve cells have to grow. And while they do that, they put out those philopodias here, little bit, very fast. They are very fast things that, so to say, senses and feels the way this nerve cell will have to grow. Eventually it will have to come out to my finger, or to the finger of the index finger of the baby. Because otherwise there must be an innervation of the muscles, because otherwise my brain could not tell my finger to do this. So it's a very important function, and it's guided probably by traces put out from different tissues. And I just brought one, but I can't make it move. I can move. It's funny to see how it moves, but I don't know how the technique is there. Now, to know, I would say, is to interpret. The mother becomes frightened because of those red spots on the baby, and brings her to the doctor, and the doctor says, "This is just, don't worry, it's just chickenpox." That's okay. So let's go into what a sign is a little more theoretically. Here we have a graphic representation of the Persian idea of a sign as a triad. And you must not be confused because the sign is the whole thing. I should have written here sign vehicle, or sometimes we say representation. But since sign is the concept we use in everyday language, it's a little confusing, but you should be able to understand the difference. Now, if we take this example with smoke, and the animal becomes seized by alarm, maybe the animal don't know that it refers to fire, but it instinctively knows that it's something dangerous. So, and this being seized by alarm, I would say, is what is the interpretant in this triadic system. So we have a sign referring to an object, but only if an interpretant is formed. If a baby senses smoke, probably the baby would not turn its head to see where the fire was. So for the baby, this is not a sign. So it's not the sign itself, it's not what we call it, the sign, that is the sign. The sign is the whole process. And it's a process, it's not a thing. It's something that happens. So I would say, we don't all agree on this, but as I see it, a sign is not material, it's not mental. It doesn't really exist. It happens and it disappears as fast again. It's a kind of ordering in events. Here we see Daphnia. Their whole morphology changes dependent on whether there are predators present in the pond or not. If there are predators present, they look like this, otherwise they look like this. So, yeah. And life, of course, is strongly semiogenic. Organisms have a surprising capacity to take advantage of any regularity that they come upon. Regularities in the environment or in the body process itself are easily appropriated by an organism as signposts directing its future behavior. And as of course this famous example with the bird's broken wing trick, the bird sees that a fox is present, for instance, and in order to get the fox away from the nest, she behaves clumsily. We say she pretends to have a broken wing. Probably not, but she at least she knows that she will have to behave clumsily, and then the fox will make the interpretation, this is a neater catch. So it will be a sign to the fox to go for her, and then gradually she will lead the fox away from the nest, and when it's far enough away from the nest, she will just fly away. Another phenomenon is what I call semiotic mutualism. We have many cases of symbiotic mutualism. This is a famous example with the crocodile and the dickops bird. The crocodile never eats this bird. The bird helps it by eating the parasites and whatever there is to bother the crocodile. It also helps in other ways. So this is what we call a symbiotic mutualism. But when we widen the perspective so that we also see it as semiotic, there's probably lots of semiotic mutualism case which doesn't involve direct physical interaction as in this case. So I think it's a very widespread phenomenon. And here comes the point where I'm a little afraid to show you a slide. I'm afraid because I did not know about Lotman when I introduced this term, semiosphere. So I use it in another sense in Lotman. You should not kill me. I naively thought I had invented it myself, and then afterwards I saw that, understood that Lotman had used it in another context, a more cultural context. I use it much more as actually as a natural concept, the totality of messages and cues, potential or actual, in the world. The semiosphere penetrates the biosphere and consists in sign processes, sounds, odors, movements, colors, electric fields, waves of any kind, chemical signals, touch, etc., etc. There are plenty of things. So, as you can see, we can eventually discuss that later. So let me end this biosemiotics introduction by pointing to the ecological part of it, what I call ecosemiotic interaction structures. The species of this world are woven into fine meshed global webs of semiotic relations. These semiotic relations, more than anything else, are responsible for the ongoing stability of Earth's ecological and biogeographical patterns. And in later years, but I now thought I had to go back to when I wrote this book, but in later years I very much worked with the concept of semiotic scaffolding, because that's exactly what is going on. The semiotic interactions between the animals and the plants and all the organisms of the world scaffolds what is going on. And this scaffolding is probably extremely important for keeping the balances the way they used to be. So, and what is interesting also is that natural selection is, as I understand, it is always constrained in its operation by these ecosemiotic interaction structures. Biologists try to explain everything by natural selection. I think we should know that natural selection is not a creative force because it's constrained inside all these things. So, I still have some time. So we have arrived at the problem here. Now I'm of course moving a little bit out of my own qualification. But I think biosemiotics reaches into so many other areas in philosophy and also in social contexts that it's necessary. I actually spent 3 chapters on a lot of things in the end of the book. It's necessary to consider how this reframing, because this is a reframing of nature, makes us think differently from what we else would think. So let's consider the concept of meaning. In a biosemiotic understanding, living systems are basically engaged in semiotic interactions in interpretative processes. Meaning is connected to the formation of interpretants in receptive historical systems, whether they are evolutionary or cultural. So, of course, meaning is always situated and local. We are not talking about meaning with big M, the meaning of the world, the meaning of life, or things like that. We are talking about meaning in the sense of interpretants. Science and meaning. Yeah, scientists, of course, claim that the problem of meaning cannot be meaningfully posed in scientific terms. Now, for this to be true, the term meaning must mean something. So are we to conclude then that something exists that science in principle cannot explain? Well, just to provoke. But I think somehow the scientist's way of showing away the whole problem of what means anything in the world cannot be done. It's not decent. And again, I show you this little dog link. and says, I say, is there not a telos? Isn't that what it is? Biologists claim that the apparent teleological aspect of selection theory is only an as-if teleology, which they call a teleonomy. But is this really so? Let's consider an example. Function. What is a function? It's a very general concept. It's used all the time in biology. And in biology, a function is understood as the answer to a question about why some object or process has evolved in a system. What is it good for? And this is strange because it's referring forward in time. What is it good for? That's the function. From the object or process along some chain of causation to the goal or the success. And in normal mechanism, in scientific mechanism, on the other hand, you look backward along some chain of causation, explaining how the feature occurred. So there's something very contradictory here. And this, of course, you know, this is a praying mantis sitting there and trying to look like a petal, you call it, don't you? A petal in a flower. Yeah. So, what is the function of the heart? Well, we know it, but it has a primary function of pumping blood, a secondary function of providing oxygen to the tissues, a tertiary function of assuring the metabolic formation of energy-carrying molecules, and so on, all the way back till the heart serves to keep the lineage or the population going. And it goes on. Now, I'll show you this picture because it is from Estonia. Kalevi, some years ago, managed to organize a meeting in Sarka where we met those people and tried to work out a number of theses on which we could agree to distinguish what biosemiotics was about. And I think one of the important things that we agreed on is that concepts of function and semiosis are intertwined. Both are teleological concepts. There's no way to escape it. They may often be coextensive. That's the three conclusions we made. Now, according to biology, it would be incorrect to say that a tree grows flowers to attract pollinators. It would be incorrect, as if it was not true. Instead, you have to say a function describes what something does, not what its purpose is. A tree simply evolved to grow flowers. But do we get any wiser by saying it that way? I don't think so. I think if we limit ourselves to saying this, we're simply not understanding what is going on. And funny enough, if you read on, this is from Wikipedia, if you read on, you'll see this. Teleological terminology is often used by biologists. It's always used by biologists as a sort of shorthand way of describing function, even though they, the biologists, know it is technically incorrect. And then comes this wonderful sentence, lay persons may not understand this distinction. However, we are stupid. Now, it happens so that Darwin himself didn't understand this, probably. In Origin of Species, chapter 3, page 71, he writes, in looking at nature, it is most necessary never to forget that every single organic being may be said to be striving to the utmost to increase in numbers. He didn't shy away from using the term striving. Actually, when you read this work, you can be in no doubt that he did think that. And it's expressed several, especially in the end, the final few paragraphs in the book are very strong here. So his the stupid thing is that Darwin is always taken in as the high authority, but if the scientists read Darwin, they wouldn't like him. The fusion of Darwin's theory with molecular genetics placed a burden upon the shoulders of natural selection that slowly annihilated the original vision of Darwin. Not only emotions and feelings, but all kinds of interpretive activity have to be understood as genetically based components in the behavioral schemes of an animal, behavioral spasms, if you like. And with this new perspective, gone was the possibility of visualizing animals as subjects in the same sense that we see ourselves as subjects. And gone was Darwin's striving. I would say modern neo-Darwinian genocentric theory is very un-Darwinian. Natural selection becomes probabilistic. Neo-Darwinism replaced Darwin's own Newtonian understanding by a modern probabilistic understanding. Change in the population was now seen as a movement through an adaptive landscape toward a state of equilibrium where gene frequencies were stabilized, so the individual lost its role as an evolutionary agent. Whereas the individual became a slave to internal and external events and forces, the selective pressures from without, and the mutational processes inside germ cells. And this is the actual state. If you read biology in modern textbooks, the individual isn't there. It's a fata morgana of some sort. Has no true existence. Strangely enough, you can read in old things like a philosopher like Bertrand Russell saying every living thing is a sort of imperialist seeking to transform as much as possible of its environment into itself and its seed. We may regard the whole of evolution as flowing from this chemical imperialism of living matter. So even Bertrand Russell, the very, very sharp philosopher, wouldn't allow this strange way of seeing things as if there was no agency, no striving though. And of course genes and molecules, genes are simply molecules, and of course molecules can't have any agency. As Richard Lewontin, geneticist from Harvard, has expressed it, DNA does nothing. DNA does nothing. Actually, I just saw, read in a crime story, I think yesterday, about a girl that wondered how a dead man's hair, what you could extract the essence of what is a person's life from his hair as DNA, and then you can say if he's guilty in a murder. I think it was funny because she used the expression "the essence of a man" about the DNA. But DNA is, yeah, at best half the story. The great attraction natural selection asserts upon the scientific mind is due to the fact that it combines the best of two worlds. For the first, it doesn't violate the belief in our world as a result of natural laws acting upon passive matter. And two, it has the effect of a true agency of sorting according to a preference. I mean, Darwin himself knew this was a bad expression, natural selection, but he said, as everybody has repeated after him, that, well, but we know it's what it is, so there's no reason to ponder this. But it's essential, of course. You can't have it both ways. And I think the attraction of natural selection is that it pretends that we can have it in both ways, which is logically impossible. So the conclusion here is not that natural selection is wrong, is not working. The conclusion is that natural selection is only part of the explanation, and another part is semiotic emergence. So that's the conclusion of this. Now I still have a few minutes left, perhaps, to run through a few slides here on ethics. I think what biosemiotics, one of the things that biosemiotics can do to us is that it can change the way we understand how we belong in the world. Jacques Monod's idea from his book Chance and Necessity from 1971, which was became a very famous book, his idea of the human being as, quote, a gypsy at the boundary of an alien world. That vision must be replaced by a conception of human beings as embedded in the biosemiosis of living nature. The human mind is just an instantiation of evolutionary trends that penetrate the life sphere and are deeply rooted in the general dynamics of the universe. We certainly belong to the earth. And this idea of the human individual, we should give it a little reflection. The very concept of individual being is far from obvious. For what exactly is the core of an individual? We're used to think in biology, but is it germ cells? Haploid life? Well, the biologists would say it's diploid life. So life starts at the conception, if this is true. But why? There's lots of organisms in this world that have most of their life as haploid organisms. Many fungi have only very, very, very short period as deep diploid systems. Or is it the fertilized egg? Is it a newborn child? I mean, these questions are not obvious at all. a human self. The self that every human being is, the fact that every human being is intimately connected to just one unique individual life history cannot be derived from the mere fact that we are living creatures. The overarching distinguishing mark of human life form is the extraordinary semiotic agility possessed by this languaging animal. And this makes us live in a virtual reality, an all-absorbing story about our own life. And that is probably extremely important, I think. Human uniqueness then is not molecular, but semiotic. The human being is defined by a process of semiotic individuation. Don't think on individuation in Jungian sense. I'm using it in a very general sense as the process of becoming an individual. So the human being is defined by a process of semiotic individuation, and it follows that no biological fact defines the beginning of a human life. The question of how old an embryo will be before it's regarded as an ethical subject cannot be decided by biology, but must be decided through democratic negotiation, just like every other serious problems we confront. There's no church coming and telling how it is, and there's no biologist coming and telling us. And then a final slide about environmental ethics. I think that we can say that a biosemiotically informed ethical position recognizes that human utility does not exhaust our ethical obligations towards natural systems, but it also refuses to ascribe moral status to all of nature's products and effects as such. Life cannot, neither in all abstractness nor in the shape of individual living beings, be said to have a claim to our protection at any price. What does have such a claim is, I would say, the semiotic individuation process. And so, as an emergent trait, the semiotic diversity and elegance. I think this is true. What we really hate to see is suffering in animals that have a long individuation story, whereas short-lived animals with only very little individuation, we don't care very much. We don't care so much to bash a fly, but we do care if the animal we are dealing in has an individuation story. And this is the semiotic individuation story that, as I see it, forms the root of where ethics should begin. So just 3 short take-home lessons from this. First, we do belong in the world. I just said that. Second, the world is knowable. This idea of the realm of a noumena is, I think, is unbelievable. And finally, third, cognition is natural. Cognition is not exclusive for humans. I think you could even talk about cognition in bacteria. Yeah, thank you.